Cool. Hey, everyone. I think everyone's in. Welcome back to Intro to Mobile Development and UI Dev, or a little bit of UI UX design in Flutter. Today is the part 2 workshop. I think the week before spring break, we did part 1. That was very based on just intro to Flutter, a little bit of Dart programming, and some UI design basics. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. This is basically what the workshop is going to comprise of. We're going to have just a quick recap of part 1, just like a 1-slide or 2-slide recapping if you did miss us last time. And then I'll go over the implementation of the to-do app that I introduced at the end of last time. And then I'll kind of give you all some ways to improve on that. And then finally, I'll give you the link to clone that off of GitHub and modify with it as you wish. So cool, let's go ahead and get started. So recap, like I said last time, we kind of jumped into Dart fundamentals. So how does Dart format conditionals, loops, and functions? So there's a lot of different things about Dart. I think the most notable thing to remember about it is that it's very similar to C++ and like a mix of Python with C++. So you have like some very simple loops. The conditionals are very similar to C++, and the functions kind of work similarly too, but it's not as strict. So that's kind of what we touched on. And then we went into a little bit of Flutter architecture. So how does Flutter lay out widgets in the widget tree? Why it's so simple to lay widgets out in Flutter. We didn't touch too much on this, but I did give you all just a little bit of, I guess, a way to visualize how these widgets work in an application. And then we touched a little bit of UI UX design basics. So we touched like 6 or 7, which was a lot, but I think the most important ones were color contrast, typography, and visual hierarchy. So these are the 3 that you should take note of when you are designing something before jumping into developing it in Flutter or whatever you're using to actually code up an app. So now here is pretty much the design that we settled on last workshop. This is the to-do app that I went ahead and implemented for you all, and we'll be talking about it step by step in the next section. So let's take a look at that. Cool. So first thing, whenever you create a Flutter application, let's say you did this design in Figma, right? This past one, and you have like, let's say these vectors, right? So by vectors, I mean these shapes, or you might have images like illustrations that are SVGs and stuff like that. The first thing you'd want to do when you start creating a Flutter app is importing some of that stuff just so that you have it ready for when you're developing. So what you could do right off the bat, once you create a Flutter application, you'll have like a bunch of stuff in the file structure, and I'll show you all a little bit of that when I demo it. But you can basically create a directory for assets, as you can see up here. And this directory is going to have your images. It might have your fonts as well. I forgot to mention that. So for this app we're going to be implementing, we're going to need 2 fonts, Poppins and Lato. And we're also going to need those 2 shape vectors I mentioned. So that's why here you see 4. I actually ended up only using 2 of these, but I imported them as PNG and as SVG. And yeah, once you create this assets folder, you'll need to import this stuff into something called a pubspec YAML file. And this is what handles all the dependencies of your Flutter application, like the Flutter version, any packages you're going to import, as well as all the assets that we just declared. One thing to note here is you do need to be careful with indentation because it's a YAML file, so it's very sensitive to white space and stuff like that. So you don't want to leave like any weird spaces here and there, whatever. You want to be consistent with your tabs. So as you can see here, there's a little bit of the pubspec YAML file. We just create an assets section and we declare the assets directory. And importing like this, if you were to do like just assets / that would import just that layer, like that level in the directory, but you also do need to declare the images directory. And by doing this, it will import any like higher subdirectories, if that makes sense. So As you saw here, this is a subdirectory of images, and we have the fonts like outside of that. Might look a little weird, but declaring it like this pretty much will do that. It'll import everything. So yeah, and then another thing to mention about the PubSpec YAML is you can also declare font families. So if you do end up using like a font very excessively, like using the bold, the italics, the light italics, like different stylings of the font, you can declare these font families in the PubSpec YAML like this. It's kind of a weird way to do it. It seems kind of like cluttered, I guess, or something, but you can basically do it like this. And you might not even end up using all these fonts. It's just so that you can have them there in the case you do need them. At least that's the way I usually go about it. So that's pretty much declaring font families in PubSpec YAML file. And I think that's everything for the PubSpec. Now we can start talking about the constants file. So the constants file, well, actually one thing to mention right off the bat is in Flutter, this lib directory is pretty much where you're going to be spending most of your time. It's going to be where you create your models, your screens, utils. So that's where we put the constants file, and then widgets and your main. This is like the most important part of the Flutter project. So that's that. And what we want to do with this constant start file is that this will hold all the styles of your application. So any colors, text style widgets. You can add other things here too, but those are the most important ones that I've like made use of. So yeah, you can create a utils folder, put a Dart file in there, name it constants. And this is kind of what ours is looking like right now. Right now, I just declare constant variables that are declared of type color, and this color function or this class that this object that you're instantiating of color, you can pass it a hex code, and this code will specify the color that you're going to be using throughout your app. And yeah, I create multiple of these variables in case you need them. Like I mentioned last time, though, you don't have to use every color. Another thing to notice here is we're using K at the beginning of the variable. This is just convention, so that later on when you import this constants file, you can do like K, and it'll like in your IDE or whatever, it'll show you the suggestions. It's just a common convention, I think, in the Flutter community. So yeah, we do that. And then here's some examples of text style widgets. These text style widgets you can declare like in any part of your code. Again, we're just putting it in this constants file to reduce that clutter, because Flutter syntax is kind of weird sometimes and it can get kind of messy. So yes, here's some text styles with the same convention. We're instantiating it the same way, but this allows us to specify text formatting parameters. So like font size, color, the family, and there's a lot more, but that's pretty much what we're doing here. That like for the scope of our application, that's pretty much all we need. So yeah, let's keep going. I think cool. So now we're getting into like the more important stuff. So these are basically the main components of our app. Like I showed before, we have the splash screen, we have the to-do screen, which is the one right here on the right. And then we have something called a to-do controller, which is a model that's internal. So you won't be like seeing it visually, if that makes sense. It's pretty much handling the logic of our application. And we're gonna have to-do cards. So right here, they're squared in different colors. We have a complete and incomplete to-do card, as well as an add to-do widget or card. So these two are different widgets, but this blue one is pretty much the same widget, just with different state. And yeah, so these are the main components of our app, pretty much just the two screens, an internal model that'll handle all the logic for us, and the cards. So now let's look at the main file. The main.dart file is very simple for now, just because all it's doing is it's this main function right here is going to run an app, and we're passing in an app called my app, which is declared right here. And a thing to also note here is that we can have stateless and stateful widgets. So stateless widgets are pretty much widgets that will never change. So icons, icon buttons, text. But if a widget can change, like when a user interacts with your app and it's supposed to change, then that's when it's stateful. In this case, we're declaring a stateless widget, but that doesn't make our entire application stateless. So it's just the two different most important ways to like instantiate or create widgets in Flutter, the stateless and stateful widgets. But here pretty much we have a build function, and this build function, you don't have to pay too much attention to like why it's structured this way, why we have context. The most important thing here is that we're returning something here, right? We're returning a material app. We're passing in a title parameter, and we're passing in a home parameter. So this home expects a widget. In this case, it's the splash screen. And if you're kind of thrown off by this material app, I say here that it's pretty much an app instance that will inherit Google's material UI design elements. It's not super important, but it's there. It's generated when you create a Flutter project. So yeah, that's pretty much all our main function is doing, is just getting our app, running it, and then calling our splash screen. So now we can start to declare the splash screen. Like I mentioned before, we can create a screens directory, and this is where it's going to hold all the files that declare our screens. So we can create a Dart file to hold our splash screen code. Here I name it splash screen.dart. Okay, and now we're getting into a bit of code. So when you create a widget, a custom widget, there's some things to note here. You can declare an init state function. This is a Flutter specific function that you can opt to include or not include. But in the case of the splash screen, it's important to include it because once the splash screen is inserted into the widget tree, you can make it call a function. In this case, we call function start time, and this start time function is declared down here. This is an asynchronous function that is going to basically just declare a duration, and we're passing in seconds. And then we store that in a variable, and we now call a timer function. But okay, let's just quickly pause. Is there any questions real quick that you can drop in the chat and I can quickly address? I don't want to like move too fast. I know this can kind of be intimidating if you've never seen Flutter code. Cool, cool. So I don't think there's any questions. Cool, let me just continue then. So again, we have this start time function. Yeah, very intimidating. We have this start time function. We're declaring a duration object, and we're just passing in a duration. So this can take in hours, minutes, seconds. In this case, we just want our splash screen to be on the screen 2 seconds. So we store that in a variable, and then we call this timer function. And the timer function is, I think, Flutter specific. It's not declared anywhere here, but you basically just need to pass it a duration and a callback function. So this callback function is declared down here. Navigate to home screen is going to do that. Here we do have some stuff going on here, but it's not super important yet, but I will mention it a bit. The more important thing to mention here is that when it navigates, when it calls this function, we're using navigator.push replacement, and this is declaring a new page route, as you see here, and we're calling to do screen, which is a future, screen that I'm going to show in the next slide. That's the main thing, right? We're just calling this function that's going to push a new screen onto the widget tree. The stuff to mention here, like I mentioned, is we're having we're declaring 2 lists of strings, to-do items and completed items. The to-do items are the items that are initially not complete, right? Like they're the top section where it says today, and the completed items are the ones that the user has already marked as complete. Right now, we're just hard coding these. There's a potential improvement that I'll mention, or I'll talk more about later, but you don't really always want to do this, like declare like hard-coded stuff. But anyway, we have this stuff like this now. just so that we can create something called a to-do controller. Like I mentioned, that's the internal model. And we're basically just passing in those two lists. And we're instantiating that, putting that in an object, and that object is then passed in to the next screen. That's all this function is doing. It could be a little intimidating. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in chat, and I have it right here. But that's the basic gist. We are making a duration object of 2 seconds. We set a timer, and then we push on to the next screen. So let's keep going. Hope we're good. This is the actual like part of the splash screen that like creates what you see on the screenshot here on the right. Yeah, after all this stuff, I'll be demoing it. So I'll show you all that in a bit. But this is what, like I said, is putting onto the screen, right? So up here we have two vectors. This is just accessing the assets, images, and then the PNGs that I showed you earlier and storing them into a variable. And then we create a scaffold. This will have a background color of a styling that is in the constants file. And then we have centering. We declare something called a stack widget, and the stack is basically going to allow us to like overlap widgets to how we want them to be, because sometimes you don't want stuff in like a row or a column, like a grid-like structure. You want to overlap these widgets. So we create a stack widget. We declare the fit as expand because we don't want these to be like cluttered up together. We want them to expand across the whole screen. And then we have three different children in here. So we have an align widget that is going to take the first top right vector and align it to the top right. That's what this is doing. This is the alignment property, and it's just saying put this at the top right. Then we have a center widget for our text. So that's centering the tasker name. And we have some styling here again. And then lastly, we have the last align widget that's doing the exact same thing, but just putting it at the bottom left. Another thing to note here is the image.asset. So this function, basically, the image class has a function .asset, and we're just passing in a string parameter. So that's this variable up here. And that's pretty much the splash screen, very simple. Yeah, I had never really used the stack widget before, but that's what that does. So yeah, again, any questions, just drop them in chat, but let's keep moving. Next thing is creating the actual dashboard screen, like the to-do screen. So we can create another file in the screens directory, and that'll hold our to-do screen code, list out all those strings that we declared in the previous screen. And so for the next few slides, I'll be showing like what that code does on the right. So the picture of the app on the right, and then the code on the left. So here, let's take it line by line. So we have the text editing controller. This will become a little clearer when we talk about the actual widgets, but this is basically just so that the user can input text. I'll talk about that in a bit. But in the build function, we have a scaffold with a background color of some styling in the constants file. And then we have something called a layout builder. And this layout builder function is basically going to take its child, and it's going to lay it out in a way that will be responsive so that it changes for different screen sizes. You don't really need to do this when you're starting out with Flutter, but I decided to include it just in case you end up getting a different emulator. You don't want to run into like overflow issues. So this is just to make the screen responsive. So then this list view widget here is basically going to take children. And what a list view widget does is it pretty much just lists multiple widgets and makes it scrollable. You might think of a container widget where things are laid out vertically. A container does not scroll. So that's kind of not a container, a column widget. Column widget lays things out vertically, but a column widget is static. It won't scroll if you don't use the list view. So that's what this layout builder list view thing is doing. Pretty much in this case, we're just declaring a container widget. You can think of it as the padding or like margins of your screen. So right now we are accessing the media query function. This is just getting the current size of your device, so width and height, and here are some hard-coded like values to multiply that. So again, just responsive stuff to scale to different things. Another thing to mention is this edge insets class. This is for padding. So you would do edge insets dot whatever. So there's symmetric, there's only, there's all sides like left, top, right, bottom. Again, it's just padding. This will become a little clearer when there's more padding widgets in other screens. But yeah, you can think of this container as just, it's going to hold everything in our screen. And then this container will hold a column. And this is where we'll start declaring like all those to-do cards and stuff. But for now, this is all I could fit in this one screenshot. But this is going to have the text tasker with some styling. And then it's going to declare a main axis alignment center. So the main axis alignment, whenever you have a column or a row, the main axis alignment is basically the axis for that widget. So let's say column, let's take column for an example. Column lays out widgets vertically. So the main axis alignment would be vertical, like, yeah, it would be vertical. And if you want to do the opposite way, so if you want to lay out widgets horizontally, or you want to access the axis horizontally, you would use cross-axis alignment. And I have some more examples on that, but pretty much we're just centering everything as we list things. And that's the beginning part of the to-do screen. It gets a little long, so let's keep going. Next thing we would want to create is these icons. So here on the left, we have a row now. A row will lay these things out horizontally. Again, main axis alignment. Now, if you notice, now we're doing .end because the main axis alignment in a row widget is horizontal. So you would want to access the end part of it. I kind of use my arm there to like represent that, but the end would be the right side pretty much. And that's kind of what's moving all these icons to the right. And then now we pretty much just list those icons out. So we have icon.settings, some styling, the size. We have the icons.notification, styling, size. This padding is all it's doing is it's putting some space between the icons. So we're wrapping this icon with a padding widget, and we're providing padding edge insets.symmetric horizontal. So on both sides, left and right, we're putting 4 pixels of padding. And then we have the icons.account circle outline. So these come from material. If you were wondering about that, you could just do icons dot and it'll give you like a long list to choose from. But those are the ones that I'm using for now. And yeah, this part's kind of simple, nothing too bad. So let's keep going. Again, leave questions in chat. Let's keep going. Next thing, we want to create the today section. So we have a column. In this case, we don't want everything centered. We want everything to the left, right? We want it left aligned because like this today text, we're going to want it on the left side. So that's why here, the first thing, we access the cross-axis alignment of a column and do it at .start. .start will do the left side. And then the children to this column will be the today text with some styling. And then here, if you remember, in Dart, we have these kind of for loops that are very like Python. What it's doing is we're looping through those incomplete items we passed in the splash screen. So right now, it would be 3, right? So for every item in this list, we're going to instantiate a padding widget. And this padding, again, just edge insets.symmetric for vertical. So now it's 4 pixels on top and bottom. And then the child to that padding will be something called a to-do item card. And this will take a state and a to-do text. I'll talk a little bit more about that because it's a custom widget, but let's get there first. So once it loops and creates those to-do item cards, it'll then, we then have to add this special to-do card, which is to add a new to-do item. And that's also another custom widget, but right now, all we're passing to that is the text controller that I mentioned before, so that the user can input text, and also the to-do controller, so the model. That's what's handling the lists of strings. So cool, that's the today section. let's keep going. The next part is basically the exact same thing. It's going to be another column. The only difference here is that now we're looping through the complete items. So again, we have 3, but again, we align everything to the left, we have the completed text, and then we loop through those items, and for each item, we put some padding between them, and we instantiate to-do item cards, but now with a state of true. So that's the only difference from here. This is false, this is true. So, and that pretty much creates our entire to-do screen. Okay, yeah, so that's our entire to-do screen. Again, any questions, feel free to drop them. But let me keep going. We're almost done here. Now let me show you the to-do controller model. Remember, we instantiated this in the splash screen. This is the constructor right here. So it's expecting 2 things, the complete to-do items and the incomplete to-do items. These are the member variable function, or yeah, member variables for that class. So we have 2 lists of strings, complete and incomplete. And then this second part of the class, these are just getter functions. So we're just declaring these simple functions that will allow us to access these variables of the class or the object you end up instantiating. So doing something like to-do controller dot complete items will call this function and return this variable complete to-do items. Same thing for the incomplete items. We're just declaring some getters. And lastly, we make a function to add a to-do. So this function is just going to take some value. In this case, it's going to be a string, and we're going to add that string to the incomplete items list. Very simple class. It's just to help you decouple the logic again, right, from your UI. If you don't do this, it gets a little messy. That's also another possible improvement, but yeah, this is just to help us out with that. So yeah, let's keep going. So now I'll talk about the to-do card widgets. These are the 2 widgets that I said were custom. So when you create a custom widget, again, you can create it stateful or stateless. Typically, most of your widgets are going to be stateful. So in this case, I declare a stateful widget. Again, remember, we were passing in text and also a state. So this is the constructor of the widget. We're just passing in these 2 things, and it's storing them in these 2 variables. So yeah, let's keep going. The actual visual appearance of this card, this is what's handling all that. So right now, let's talk about the build function first. So we have a container, and then this container is going to have some styling. There's definitely a lot going on here, but pretty much all it's doing is it's adding the shadow. If you see here, it's adding the shadow to the card. It's adding a box decoration, border radius that's making the corners round, adding a box shadow with colors .black and .width opacity. There's a lot of details here, but I don't want to jump too much into them just because there's like a lot going here. But I'll let you all figure that out if you do end up cloning the repo and messing around with it, right? But basically, the container will have a child of card, and this card will have, again, a rounded rectangle border. So yeah, all this stuff is just styling. Another thing to mention before I move on from the screen is the declaration of this variable called underscore status. Right now, this is an integer variable just holding a 1. That's going to become important for the radio button here. So let me keep going. Now, under this this card styling stuff, the child to the card widget is going to have a list tile. This list tile, you can think of this as basically a widget that'll have 3 parts to it. So it has a leading icon, it has a text like title icon, text like attribute thing to it, and then it has a trailing icon. So that's basically all we are doing here in this section. We have a leading icon of menu with some styling, and then we have a title widget of text just to list out our to-do text. And then we have some styling. So depending on the state we passed in, right, if it's complete or incomplete, it'll have some complete styling or not. And then the radio button. So the radio button, here is also another possible improvement. It's not the best user experience because typically you would want like something like a checkbox, but for the sake of implementing the design, what we do here is we have two main attributes here. We have a value and a group value. These two parameters should be equal for the radio button to be on. So for now, our value is set to widget.state. Remember, state is what we passed in, true or false. Depending on the value of that, we will give it a 1 or a 0. And then our group value is underscore status. So underscore status is this over here that I said. It's initially a 1. So if you pass in this card a true, then 1 and 1 will be equal, and that's why it will be on in the complete state. But if it's not true, then it will look like this top case over here. And then we have some styling stuff, and then we have an onChanged function. What this is doing is that once you click on this, it'll receive the new value. It'll call a very important Flutter function set state. This will basically just refresh the screen so that you can see the difference, like you can see it turn on or off. And we're just setting that underscore status variable to the value we receive on this onChanged function. Definitely a lot, I know, but yeah, that's what's handling the card logic. So yeah, I think the next thing is going to be the add to do card. Yeah. So again, we have this constructor. We have two different variables, the text editing controller and the to do controller. Remember, the to do controller is our custom made class, and the text editing controller is just Flutter specific so that we can extract text from the user. So let's keep going. Again, same thing here. We have some more styling with the containers. This is just making the box shadow and the roundedness of it. That's pretty much it. A lot of stuff going on here. I don't want to intimidate y'all. But again, a list tile, the only difference here mainly is the styling. So you can see that this is kind of grayed out compared to the other one. So these styles are declared here with some opacity. Again, we have our trailing and leading icons, only now it's an add icon. Now the main difference though is the actual title. So this is now a text field. We pass this text field a controller, which is that text controller we instantiated. We pass in some styling stuff, and then we have a onSubmitted function, sorry. This function will take in whatever text the user types in right here, and we'll send it to that add to do function for the to do controller. So yeah, that's just storing it now in our model. And then we're calling this set state function to refresh the screen, and then we're clearing the to do controller, right? We don't want the text to stay there after they add it. And then we have some decoration stuff. So like the placeholder text, like adding a new task that'll already be there when the user starts typing. Some more styling stuff. We don't want a border. Just some stuff that I'll let you all look into, right? I just want to give you all like a glossy review of it. So yeah, now let's go ahead and demo it up. Those are like the most important things. So now let me show you. Let me share the whole screen and I'll show you what it looks like. So this is y'all can see my desktop, right? With the emulator. Cool, cool. Awesome. So here on the left, we have our code editor, right? Again, this is our file structure. If you notice, we have the Android and iOS folders. This is what handles the compilation of our app for different platforms. We also have like web and Windows, but I didn't really touch on that. The main important part, right, is the lib folder, and this is what has all of our files. So this is the main file, like I showed y'all. Here's the constants file. So it's kind of longer than I showed in the picture, but again, just text styles. Let's see, the models, exactly the same, the screens. But here on the right, we have the actual app running. So let me refresh it so I can show you all the splash screen in action. So it puts it on the screen and then bam, right back to the main screen. That's the timer function in action. And then now that we're on this main screen, These icons don't do anything yet, but we have the today section. And if we have these completed, we can select these and they will, well, be selected, and they can be toggled on and off. If the user wants to add a new text, well, they can type whatever they want here. Let's do test. And then once they hit the enter button, it'll add it. So bam. And then they can also complete these as well. And then they could also view some older tasks. That's the basic gist of the app. That's all the functionality. But yeah, I mean, all the code is the same. Nothing's changed here. Yeah, we have our screens, our to-do controller, the widgets. So these are the custom widgets we declared. So yeah, I know this syntax looks very intimidating. It's weird. It gets really long. But you kind of just get used to it as you use more Flutter. So yeah, let's now, okay. What is the max you can do? Would it keep pushing down the completed list? Yeah, so remember how I mentioned the list view will create a scrolling vertical list of widgets. So if we keep doing this, like let me add more, test, test, test. So basically now we have this long list of tasks and it'll never overflow because like I said, if you declare a column, this like just a column, this column will be placed in a specific spot of the screen and it will not allow you to scroll. But using the list view and the layout builder and all that stuff basically lets you have this infinite like scrolling capability. So that's what I really like about this view. But yeah, good question, good question. Cool. So I mean, we can come back to this if anyone else has more questions, but let me get back to this, to the slide so I can show you all the, basically the improvements. Cool. Let me full screen this. Oh wait, am I not sharing it? Let me share this. There you go. Cool. So let's keep going. So some future improvements, right? Ways you can clone this and expand on it is, so first thing, you might have noticed the menu buttons on the left. Those buttons were mainly to reorder those list items, but I will be leaving that for you if you're interested in keep using Flutter. You can add something called a reorderable list view widget, and this will potentially let you move those to-do items. You could also do it so that it moves from one section to the other. That's something I also didn't implement. Another thing you can do is implement more classes. So you can actually create, like, on top of that controller model, you can create maybe like a single to-do item class, which will hold just that string. And you might have a separate one that'll handle incomplete to-dos. Maybe it could be an abstract class. There's a lot of different things you can do with this, but continuing to do that will help facilitate the decoupling of logic from your UI. If you put your logic very close to the UI, it ends up getting very messy on top of the Flutter syntax, and it just leads to not the cleanest code. So that's another thing you could do. Instead of just having a controller, you can create more classes. Another thing you can do is a UI UX fix. I kind of mentioned this. You can try experimenting with checkbox widgets. Sorry, I can't talk. Instead of a radio widget. This will just be literally a checkbox, and when you click it, it'll show a filled checkbox. If not, it'll just be an outline of a checkbox. This might be a better UI or UX user experience because radio widgets, you might know, they are typically used when there's multiple like choices. So if you have like a question, a radio widget or a set of radio widgets might be used to select just one, if that makes sense. In that case, you wouldn't use a checkbox because you could use a checkbox if you need to select multiple answers for a question, but that's typically the use case for a radio widget, not so much for one singular like to-do item like we do. So that's kind of a fix you can do there. You can change those to checkboxes. Another thing you could do is writing unit and integration tests. This is more going into like software engineering practices if you haven't taken software engineering. but unit tests will help test, for example, your model. So testing the functionality of your logic. Integration tests will check more of the actual UI. So testing that your buttons work, your radio buttons work, you can enter text and see a new card. That's always great, right? You could always get ahead on testing and stuff. That's another thing you could do. And lastly, and this is kind of an ambitious one, you can add a JSON implementation of to-do items so that you can import that to your UI. Like I mentioned earlier, you don't really want to declare your list of strings like in the splash screen, how we do right now, because like that's static, like you can't really change that in the future. Like you wouldn't be able to remove that unless you like actually delete those lines of code. So that's another possible improvement. You can create a JSON that'll import these to-do items, and maybe even eventually you can make a backend in maybe Node.js or a completely different technology that'll help serve that that JSON file to you. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff to do with this app. There's a lot of things you can do to expand your knowledge, and it'll help you kind of familiarize yourself with Flutter. But yeah, I'll go ahead and stop talking now. Well, actually not yet. The cloning, here you can fork and clone the project off GitHub. So here, I'll be posting these slides in the Discord, but if you come here to this here link and you come here, it'll take you to my GitHub profile. And you could pretty much come up here and fork, and then you can clone this off of GitHub. And then from there, you can do all the changes like I mentioned. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the presentation. Thanks for coming, y'all. Are there any more questions that I can answer about the app? I can show you all the app again if you have questions about it. Let me share the entire screen if that's the case. But yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Cool. So I guess I'll take the silence in chat, and yeah, it's very intimidating, but it's awesome. Flutter's very responsive, helps you lay widgets out very neatly. Yeah, awesome. I'm glad I helped y'all. If you have any questions on mobile stuff outside of the workshop, feel free to message me on Discord, and I'll help where I can. So yeah, so, yeah, this is definitely a jump from C++. But if you're familiar with C++, like picking up Dart shouldn't be too bad. But cool. Doesn't seem like anyone has questions, so I guess I'll go ahead and end the meeting here. Again, if y'all ever need any help with anything, feel free to message. And yeah, thanks again for coming, y'all.